Summing up, I'd say I served in a necessarily undemocratic system, observing a waste of both human potential and materiel, plus some deliberate criminal action in my first permanent party unit. I was often at the mercy of martinet and sadistic types. As an administrative sergeant, I knew of a few instances of torment and injustice, usually based on ethnic or religious prejudice, which I was powerless to prevent or correct. 2 brothers served Army tours in Vietnam. The elder, a career NCO in Signal Corps, had also served in Korea after the ceasefire and had considered the Republic of Korea forces as dependable allies. The younger brother, infantry trained, volunteered at 17 to, quote, save Southeast Asia from the communists. Both agreed that this Vietnam situation was militarily hopeless, since the enemy was everywhere, even in the recreation areas, where some unspoken non-combat agreement applied. The younger brother was troubled by having to shoot a young boy fiddling with his tanker truck, either for theft or sabotage, and not heeding a warning. In a night attack on his firebase, he was deafened by a satchel charge and remained so for some weeks. During his tour, he became addicted to drugs and alcohol, and for years has been unable to break the bond. A lengthy supervised withdrawal program failed to help. He has never regained his life and remains a fragment, flotsam. At a recent reunion, he recounted one scenario of many, he says, which signifies the whole Vietnam experience. A crammed civilian bus full of fleeing people with their possessions was allowed into the middle of his military convoy. In a high pass near the Cambodian border, they came under attack. The bus was hit and heeled over, lightly pinning a young woman who'd fallen beneath. An instant order came to push the bus off the cliff alongside. This was done. As it went, the damaged vehicle cut the young woman in half, then carried the screaming passengers on a last mortal journey down the mountain. They did send a medical crew down later to see if anyone survived. From my own account, it's evident that war has been partly hurtful as well as incidentally helpful to my family. It gave my father defense work, and I benefited from 3 years of the GI Bill. However, the good was truly incidental, much as a devastating hurricane spins off rain to dry regions. War may be horrible to its victims, but vastly profitable to others. That is why the Pentagon contains a population of a whole city in one building. In public school, I accepted without question the epic myths of U.S. wars, but I first heard battle and warfare actually praised in the service. Many men still regard combat tribally as the time-honored and supreme test of masculine courage and group loyalty, even if all they do is march and wear a uniform. Others come most vibrantly alive in the nearness of violent death or the risk of it. Some totally embrace the culture, regard wartime service as the greatest, cruelest boys' club of all. I've read that Winston Churchill in World War I confessed in a letter home, "God forgive me, I love it." Of course, he was a Sandhurst graduate. The ultimate thrill of war may be its anarchy, the chance to commit the criminal and socially forbidden with impunity. I can still picture Sarge, our oldest and highest ranked non-com, in headquarters detachment, striding around and swinging his fist when called in over fighting at the NCO club. By God, I'm sick of this chicken shit garrison duty. There's none of this shit in wartime. You can do what you want and get away with it. Nor is it easy to forget Captain Partaine's drunken boast to us at calisthenics each morning of, quote, going into battle with 300, coming back with 75, unquote. Liquor and prostitution, the soldier's anodynes and proof of his vitality, are ever present at Army posts, no matter how remote. This post wasn't different. Trainees were allowed only 3.2% beer at the PX, so they had to drink twice as much. But the officer and NCO clubs flowed with unlimited hard stuff, judging from the behavior of our own personnel. Our friendly corporal, who lived in and guarded the Class 6 supply, liquor, a barred warehouse, was the most popular guy around. Personable and efficient, he made extra money by bartending at officers' parties. This charming young man, a friend, assured me that all spirits firms were very patriotic in their dealings with the military. His own family ran a liquor business in Chicago. It shocked me to hear that he had died soon after his separation from his own drinking habit. Prostitution was another matter, but also easy of access, since the drinking and dancing clubs with available ladies were only a mile or so beyond the front gate and the MP checkpoint. One attempt by our most criminal enlisted man in the headquarters detachment failed when he was caught near the firing ranges with 2 girls and a mattress in his convertible. The service does actually discourage bad publicity and STDs. It seems clear now that my best memorial to Harold is to speak against this cult of war and militarism for the sake of all the young of the species and for the health of the earth that we draw lines upon to fight over. This public attitude of viewing war as a verity of human nature and a useful political tool puzzles me. Resorting to it means either a failure to communicate or a criminal action. Fort and fight, except in a truly defensive situation, works very poorly. Whether for individual, family, or society and nation, a belligerent attitude fails to yield much beyond more combat. In international affairs, a war may end in arrogance and corruption through triumph, or misery and lasting hatred through defeat. Even a draw can mean mutual and long-lasting exhaustion. In our society in recent years, we saw instances of small civilian groups, or militia, quote, fortifying an area and attempting to secede from the U.S., one in the northern part of the Ozarks. In such cases, the group's defiance and suspicion easily call forth a strong response from local authorities. One side or the other provokes a reaction, and tragedy often results. Waco and Ruby Ridge come to mind. In any social unit, humanity survives and prospers best through cooperation. All too often, constant war-making siegs into a race to the bottom in an effort to outdo the enemy. Language, commerce, society itself, all flourish through cooperation, friendly competition, and compromise, which means sharing by ceding some of what desires for the greater common goal. Compromise is here used in the sense of a workable solution, not as commonly assumed in a winner-take-all society, a shameful surrender. Only an actively cooperating society can remain sustainable and stable. Peaceful social living is a dynamic, creative process, not a static condition. Just as an ideal personal love is a dynamic peace in each other between individuals with a will to love and share, so social peace requires eclectic appreciation of many viewpoints within an overarching agreement in the spirit of our basic documents, an open-eyed but willing attitude. We live at a time when humanity teeters on the cusp of change, forced by threatening choices, dominated by Janus, the god of gates and doorways. Overwhelming fears plague us, but fear is a poor emotion for making long-term decisions. Public figures arise, claiming that they alone can lead us past our crises born of hardened attitudes, which often these new leaders deepen by their own entrenched convictions. Lately, some disturbing notions have arisen, reminiscent of the late 19th and early 20th centuries. The doubts and fears of W.B. Yeats and Thomas Hardy plague us, along with Aldous Huxley's warnings of the ethical conundrums posed by our reliance on new technologies to solve all our problems. Any remedy will do, except to change our behavior, it seems. This fearful social atmosphere causes administrations and society to seek safety and more civil control and orthodoxy. But governments which place the combative and fearful control impulse first often meet their emergencies blindly, since they tend to restrict intelligence input to the like-minded and to their sycophants. Since the planet has shrunk beneath the pressure of massive world population, we can no longer afford social and political decisions made on a basis of short-term self-interest. Nuclear and ecological dangers threaten all existence. Our nation can no longer afford an uncaring or ill-informed citizen voter. Every citizen's learning should be an ongoing course of critical thinking. We should all become mentally independent, capable of intelligent response, and fearlessly donating such to the public information pool. This, not secrecy and conformity, is the major strength of an open society. We should encourage by all peaceful means the democratic, open society concept across nations, and should prove we are in earnest by fully engaging in and backing the United Nations. an organization best reformed from within. The UN suffers greatly when its most powerful members insist on preferential treatment. It was a fine idea from its inception at the close of World War II, when E.B. White commended the plan in the New Yorker, and Eleanor Roosevelt chaired the Human Rights Commission and helped draft the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Mrs. Roosevelt long championed world peace while reserving the right of self-defense in a truly defensive situation. I doubt she ever considered preemptive strikes as truly defensive. In 1986, the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, UNESCO, issued its Seville Statement Against Violence, concluding on the basis of a study by 20 international scientists and scholars that nothing in the DNA of mankind indicated any genetic predisposition to modern mass warfare, but that it was a social and cultural phenomenon resulting from a combination of factors, that it wasn't inevitable by any means, and that the species which invented modern warfare could also construct a culture of peace. This undercuts the argument of jingoists who insist that war is inevitable, the so-be-it types who perpetuate the old doomsday complex. I view myself as an ordinary person, born into a society startling and disorienting, occasionally inspiring. In an era of waste and extravagant display, what lodestar or gyroscope can one use to simplify a life pattern and maintain emotional stability? Lately, I've adopted the ideal of quality in all aspects of living: work, play, and personal relationships. And as a consumer, I vow to buy mostly the durable, reusable, easily maintained, thoughtfully simple of design, a bit of universal essence in each product, a large order, but worthy of the attempt. Pursued widely, such a standard may be the true economy for any society. A bit of the most competitive over time for market and the least susceptible to market change. And as my own motto in art, learning, and personal relations, I've taken love, understand, create. Beginning with any one of the trio, I'm aiming for a clear-eyed eclecticism, matching up the best elements of my personal world. Maybe the movement of humanity in space-time should be forever mentally expansive, educational, creatively enriching. To me, the only true education is self-driven and thrilling to the curious individual consciousness. The excited and exploring mind doesn't need to be certified, but trains itself by climbing from the known through the unknown. And the cosmos must hold an infinity of unknowns. For ages it's been obvious that mankind will not give up our exploring passion. During the last half-century, this attempt to move from this planet into the greater universe. Further, it's clear to me that as a species we must first scrap our habit of offensive warfare. Along with our fearful fixation, either from paleo days or from fear of our fellows, that any organism encountered in space exploration had the desire of devouring, destroying, or enslaving humans. Are these projected monsters of the id? This is the thrust of most space fantasy films that I've viewed. Yes, our habit of offensive warfare should be scrapped and never leave this planet. This is a tall order, but the only salvation I see for us as a species worth preserving. I move on with one more assault on this bloody tribal anachronism. Warfare is the same reaction on a social basis as Zach Vickers' reaction on an individual one, a furious spitting against all norms of rational behavior and self-control, rejecting and denying our best values to create mayhem against man and nature. War is coordinated social madness, organized in logical action toward an insane goal. We take pride in deliberately degrading promising young humans into walking lethal weapons. Aside from acting purely defensively or cooperatively to prevent genocide, should governments pit the natural increase of the species against one another in bloody struggles over abstract political, religious, or even Lebensraum differences? About this last, if even a small fish in an African Rift Valley lake can adjust to crises by altering its size and even its sex as need arises, surely a being which has changed itself amazingly in historical time, with special requirements for transport, food, and shelter, reproduction and excretion, a porta potty on the moon, art and culture can figure out and live by its own homeostatic ratios for space and supplies. Its needful demographics to flourish peacefully within its given ecology. Again, borrowing Shakespeare's words from his sonnet on degrading love, war is, quote, a spending of the spirit in a waste of shame. The highest qualities, courage, loyalty, resourcefulness, and creativity, intense mental and emotional effort, total physical concentration, supreme self-sacrifice are all subverted to the lowest, most degenerate goal of all, the endorsed mass murder of our own species. There are no wars without atrocities on all sides. War is itself an atrocity. And military technology has increased collateral damage exponentially despite claims of surgical strikes and remote-controlled assassinations. We've just left a century infamous for the staggering totals of civilian and military war death, rivaling even the worst plagues and natural disasters recorded. Civilian deaths usually exceed the military ones in war. And now, a decade into this new century, it looks hardly more promising. Ominous portents abound, huge military budgets for weapons and weapon research, for standing armies, the boom in international arms trading, the increase of hugely profitable firms of mercenary soldiers, security, contractors, quote, plus the resurgence of ideas from the age of empire, Kipling's white man's burden, and the Pax Romana idea of peace and prosperity here through unending warfare there. These phenomena greatly alarm the thoughtful among us, causing them to turn out many books and articles on it. What's the root source of all this? I believe that both war and the revived practice of capital punishment, once on its way out in the U.S., owe much to the same ancient bases of anger and revenge. These practices demean our whole species. This revival of the Pax Romana idea perplexes me. According to its backers, our nature should fight terrorism, quote, and go about imposing democracy by invading and militarily terrorizing these unruly smaller nations. Shock and awe, quote, unquote. Then maintaining a military and civil oversight until a social system we approve of takes hold. Is this because we believe ourselves powerful and prosperous and, of course, superior in every way? Isn't this neo-colonialism and empire building? Is it even possible in an age of instant global communication? I find it both repugnant and doubtful. The will to resist and cultural pride are powerful motives for anyone. Then, too, if we pursue such a course, our own resources, as well as the planet's, do have limits. And capturing new ones doesn't always work out. In the classical world, peace here through war there meant that staples and desired rarities, or sumptuary goods, flowed back to the centers of empire, while imperial armies fought on at the fringe, capturing new markets and territories. No far frontiers now exist, except the poles, sea bottom, space, and now the ether, or cyberspace, all of which we are quite capable of fighting over unless we change our ways. Besides, overextension often results in neglect and malfunction within systems until the whole grandiose structure implodes. Perhaps we can think of examples, recent as well as ancient. Even multinational corporations, empires, may have their own problems. And so we come to the Republic's problems with ethics and principles. No nation claiming to be a bastion of democracy and individual freedom can violate with impunity its basic beliefs. In a democracy, the process is the product, to be adhered to both internally or externally, or else the lie is revealed, good for us only among our elect, and when and where we wish it. No nation can ignore the bulk of humanity through a muscle-flexing ultranationalism, flouting designed treaties devised to cope with shared global problems without damaging its own society, and tightening control on its citizenry through scare tactics, manipulating, misinforming, and otherwise sequestering or misusing information, and impugning the motives of the loyal opposition further divide the body politic, plus breeding a sure contempt for authority. Social coercion and fear-mongering unite only at first, but sweeping away all freedoms in the name of security demoralizes completely, isolating each citizen in a web of suspicion and denunciation. Have we learned nothing from the histories of Russia and Germany in the 20th century? Achieving a true peace through war readiness and nuclear threat always seemed chancy to me, and even less likely now. In an age of cunning long-range weaponry and ongoing military research, in the 1950s we were told that the ICBM policy of balanced might, or MAD, M-A-D, mutual assured destruction, was our best guarantee of a nervous stalemate with the Soviet Union. So here we are, just as jittery over 50 years later, at a time when lesser nations are strapping on nuclear weapons like six-shooters. If we are ever to hope for anything more than a precarious armed truce, we must defuse the single most destructive weapon the world has ever known. No, not the atomic bomb, but the human will to domination and vengeance, plus our curious habit of bequeathing and inheriting group hatred. Any more of this peace through war, quote, may be the silence of millions of vaporized bodies, even of an earth incapable of sustaining the thin, rich skein of interrelated life forms that we are finally learning to value as the only true wealth in a universe of vast sterile spaces around life oases like our own planet. I now believe that our species threatens itself by its own blind success. Further, I'm convinced that any time a species attempts utter domination of other species and of its total ecology, it risks its own extinction by breaking myriad vital interdependencies it fails to recognize. To me, this is risking racial suicide. Any organism may compete for its existence. Only we who claim rationality should realize that exploitation and extinction of other species can equal death to the one atop the food chain. In his Nobel Prize speech, William Faulkner made an intriguing and cryptic statement, his belief that, quote, man would ultimately prevail, unquote. Prevail over whom or what? Ultimate prevalence would seem to call for ultimate wisdom, a compassionate, all-seeing wisdom. My lesser hope is that we may triumph over our own fearful, destructive, and wantonly selfish tendencies, thereby rising toward full maturity and dignity as a species, and possibly ensuring our physical survival on the only real life arc we as yet positively know to exist in the tremendous space sea of the universe. We may in the process help save at least part of Earth's precious remnant of varied life forms from the current grand die-off, an extermination which we seem to hasten if not actually cause. Who knows? Given a especially desperate crisis, we may even vindicate one of our more dubious traits, such as our willingness to abandon all personal judgment in favor of troop leadership. From a cosmic perspective, humanity may be merely a single life form, evolved by accident beyond nature's common bonds to encompass and degrade its environment, and now searching for new habitat to ransack, its appetite as keen and mindless as that of any rabid virus. This is an unflattering view. I prefer a different. I still believe in some element of benevolent impulse coded in our genes. One could call it long-term self-interest, which, given its chance, may likely prevail. On the basis of my life experience, I'm pleading for an intelligent and passionate humanity-wide campaign to protect, study, and nurture a portion of all surviving life forms on Earth, plus any we may encounter elsewhere, as a policy of our own survival. For the magnificent nature of evolution dictates that the supposed enemy of today may become the savior of tomorrow. That is the strength of varied adaptation to the challenge of existence. The process allows none the option of failure to try. Does this plea for personal and united action to end the bloody mass sacrifice of war and to preserve and nurture all life forms seem excessive to you? It certainly does not to me. The time is here for mankind, each one of us, for humankind, to take responsibility for our collective actions, for our individual actions, and for our future selves, and for the future of all life. Time now for racial noblesse oblige. This portion of fate in our hands no one can ignore. We shall each need equal measures of insight, compassion, and developing wisdom put into action now. A true reverence for life, as life, must become a universal and continuous passion. So at last I come to a stop. Still wondering about the fate of my species, about the fate of all life on Earth, as humanity, still in its adolescence, claws at the stars. I wonder if we can rise to accept this supreme stewardship, if we can repair some of the damage to this garden where we each awoke to life, and if we can learn to live fully in the highest meaning of noblesse oblige, that is, ultimate power to act together with ultimate compassionate understanding. I've said what I could for Harold and all the hopeful young like him, my old obligation, and tried to understand my own wandering pattern. Now I'm left with only a few images: a trembling iris bloom sprung from a rocky riverbank, Harold's clear gaze as he lay on the grave tablet, my own younger self on a hump of fossil rock amid roaring water, staring at a hatchling creature eyeing me both steadily and warily.
John Rule, April 2011, Fayetteville, Arkansas. Thank you, John, for sharing Ode to Iris.